paying jobs in a new industry, but Australia's going to sit back and say, no, we're going to run it on intermittent power. We're going to run a full-time economy on part-time power. We're going to run Australia on a windmill and solar panels. Just watch us. Now, and green hydrogen.
That's not true, Barnaby. I've got to correct you. They're saying, no, Barnaby, I've got to pull you up. We can't have misinformation. They're going to run it on wind farms, yes, and solar farms, yes, and car batteries. You forgot that latest announcement by Chris Bowen. And car batteries for when we're short. So don't forget that.
You've got to duck home because I'm about to... Yeah, you've got to duck home because I want to iron my clothes, you know.
Absolutely correct. Working from home has got some benefit for the government.
Mate.
Yes, exactly.
It's Timothy Leary economics. Here it comes.
Great to see you, Barnaby. See you later. After the break, how weak is Joe Biden? You know, he probably didn't even notice, but Iranian-backed militants this week hit yet another US base. Nothing. No reaction. Plus, new video showing Kamala Harris, her new running mate, making false claims about a supposed war record. What a hero.
I used to be a homicide detective. It was my job to lock people up and put them in here.
You get treated like an animal, you're going to act like one.
I didn't really care what happened to them. Whatever they got inside, I reckon they deserved.
You walk out of the cell, you might not be walking back in that night.
Now I'm going back into a maximum security prison to find out what I was missing.
We thought it was going to be a slaughterhouse.
Join me on my prison journey. Listen to my new podcast, Breaking Badness, with Gary Jubilant. Visit breakingbadness.com.au or search for it on CrimeX Plus, on Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
America's presidential election has got even more farcical. New video of someone pretending what is not. Now, you'd laugh if it wasn't so serious. Kamala Harris and a new running mate, Governor Tim Walz, really could be America's new president and vice president after the November election. And last night I mentioned that Walz was being sold by the Harris team as a straight-talking man of the people who'd served in the National Guard for 24 years, the Patriot. That bit's true. But I pointed out that this hero actually quit as Command Sergeant Major of the National Guard unit he was in charge of as soon as he heard it was about to be deployed to Iraq in the war on terror. He left him in the lurch. And now, though, we have got video of Walz claiming, and not for the first time, he went to war. Or in this case, that he wants to ban guns of the kind that he took to war.
And we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
Now, the fact is Walz never got closer to Iraq than Italy, which doesn't impress the man who replaced him as his unit's Command Sergeant Major and took it to Iraq.
I mean, if he thinks Italy was a combat zone or a war zone and he was carrying that in war, he's delusional.
Now, something about Harris and Walz tells me they're going to be as weak in the White House as Joe Biden has been. I'm projecting America to the world. And Biden has been disastrously weak in standing up against America's enemies, like the Iranian-backed extremists who on Monday attacked a US base in Iraq, injuring 7 people. And what's Biden done about that? Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired 4-star general who served as the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thank you so much for joining us. General, I have been frustrated. I know you've been frustrated at the projection of weakness militarily under the Biden administration. Now, on Monday, 7 American military personnel injured in a suspected rocket attack at a US base in Iraq. In the last 9 months, there have been more than 170 attacks on US military bases and assets in Syria, in Iraq, in Jordan, and almost no American response. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I think you pointed out right at the beginning, it's absolutely an inability of the Biden administration to want to confront their adversaries because they actually fear that there may be some escalation. They don't see, by confronting their adversaries, they may indeed shut them down. In over 200 attacks on American forces in Iraq and Syria have taken place since the Biden administration came into power in January of 21. And actually, several months ago, they were able to shut down those attacks when they killed a Iranian-backed militia leader in Iraq. And the Iranians, having seen that, told the militias, both Iraqi-backed and Syria, to shut down their activities. Now their activities have started again, I think largely because of the success that Israel is enjoying in killing Hamas top political and military leaders, as well as Hezbollah military leaders. And Iran has energized them again. The problem we have had from the outset with the Biden administration, Andrew, in dealing with the Iranian-backed Iraqi and Shia militias, the Houthis themselves, and the Hezbollah, is that this administration is unwilling to confront Iran directly. Most of us who observe this, to include the United States military commander in Central Command who oversees the Middle East, he has made continuous recommendations to the Biden administration to permit him to attack Iranian military assets that Iran owns that are operating in the Red Sea to help target the Houthis on the merchant ships and also U.S. and other naval ships that are protecting them, to target Iranian assets in Iran to prevent the continuous attacks on U.S. forces, as you just pointed out. This has been a prevailing problem from the outset. The Biden administration takes a hands-off approach when it comes to Iran out of fear of escalation. And guess what is happening? Iran continues to escalate.
Can you just take us to Ukraine? Early this year, I was worried. I mean, the newspaper headlines were all Russia offensive in Ukraine. They're taking territory. Admittedly, it was very small bits, incremental, at a huge loss, but they were advancing. Now, an astonishing development, reports that Ukrainian forces have gone into Russia. They're 15 kilometres, not much I know, but still 15 kilometres into Russia in the Kursk region. What is going on?
Well, the fact of the matter is that this war has been protracted largely by the fact that the Biden administration has handcuffed the Ukrainians in not delivering them the weapon systems and the munitions they needed when they needed it and in the quantity that they needed it. The Europeans made up their minds last year that the Russian threat of escalating to the use of nuclear weapons is a hollow threat. But the Biden administration still takes a knee to that threat, and it's still prohibiting they're holding back. It's permitting the Ukrainians to use all of the weapons we've given them to attack into Russia. And secondly, not giving them the amount of weapons when they need them. The Ukrainians are enormously frustrated by this. And we at the Institute for the Study of War are in almost a daily contact with what is happening. Despite the challenges of getting equipment to them this year, largely because of the political debate that took place in America, the Ukrainians are still holding their own. They have killed tens of thousands of Russians in their offensive operations, and they are moving now to some, at least, tactical advantage in operations dealing with Russia itself. I'm absolutely convinced that what's driving the Biden administration, Andrew, from the very outset, they don't say it publicly, but having dealt with their policy leaders now for almost 3 years, I have come to the conclusion that from the outset, they've always wanted to go to negotiations as quickly as possible. Give the Ukrainians enough to help themselves and defend themselves, and let's get to negotiations and stop the war. And what does that really mean? That means Russia owns a certain percentage, 20, 25, maybe 30% of Ukraine. And the people are not liberated. They're living in occupied territory, something that Zelensky and his leaders, cannot tolerate. But that's where the Biden administration is. And look at it. Aren't they doing the same thing to Prime Minister Netanyahu in the Middle East, putting that same kind of pressure on him? They really want a permanent ceasefire, end the war now. What does that mean? That means thousands of Hamas fighters are still in Gaza. That means they survive. That means they declare victory. That means they reattack at a time and place of their choosing.
Look, we need a paradigm shift, obviously, in thinking here. Otherwise, the enemies of democracies are going to triumph. Jack Keane, thank you so much for your time, General Keane.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew. As always, thank you.
That's part of a longer interview I did with Jack Keane earlier. And if you want to see that, go to our Sky News website or the Sky News YouTube channel as well. After the break, Australia's now third in the medal tally at the Olympics. Does that make us a bit strange? Plus Anthony Albanese's dud CD, but my hit book of the week.
My name is Manny Carudis, and I'm a former New South Wales policeman turned investigative reporter with a passion for missing persons cases. I'm here to quickly tell you about our True Crime Australia podcast, The Missing. In this series, I look at old missing persons cases which have all gone cold in an attempt to try and uncover new information which could help see these missing people reunited with their loved ones, or any form of clue that could bring these families closure. The Missing is available now wherever you get your podcasts, and early and ad-free on Crimex Plus on Apple Podcasts.
Alan Joyce used to be the king of Qantas, the genius so powerful that he could turn Qantas into his political soapbox. But now that he's left, the new Qantas management has cut his payout by more than $9 million. $9.3 million to be exactly. Wow. The new Qantas leadership is blaming Joyce in large part for leaving Qantas with reputational damage after ruling too much like a dictator, really. Poor baggage handling, flight cancellations, illegally sacking 1,700 ground workers. Joining me is the panel. James McPherson from The Late Debate here on Sky News, and Evelyn Ray, farmer and Sky News regular. James, the lesson of this $9 billion hit to his wallet, gee, that must hurt.
Indeed. I think the lesson, Andrew, is stay humble. Qantas became incredibly arrogant and then acted like they were entitled to do as they please. And what's that old maxim? Pride comes before a fall. Well, there's nothing like a fall from 30,000 feet. And that's what Qantas suffered. They took the Australian public for granted. And there's always been a lot of love for Qantas. They've been our national airline, Qantas, the spirit of Australia. But they took it for granted, and it took a while, but gradually they just exhausted the patience of Australians. They treated Australians like mugs. Staff on Qantas flights act as if they're doing you a favour by allowing you onto their aircraft. And eventually Australians just got jack of that attitude, unfortunately. I would love a airline run by a CEO whose name I don't know, and whose political leanings, sexuality and cultural fetishes I'm not aware of. It would be wonderful to have an anonymous CEO of an airline so we can just get on a plane, get to where we're going without all the other stuff. I think that's the big lesson.
I must say, Evelyn, most of the kind of stuff I've dealt with is actually quite pleasant. I don't blame them, although I have to say I'm sick and tired of the acknowledgement of elders past and present every time I land somewhere. But what do you make of this? What's the moral lesson here?
I think James sort of hit it at the latter part of what he said. And I think it comes to the old, tried and tested saying, you go woke, you go broke, and I think most of the issues that Qantas had could have probably been rectified or remedied if they weren't invested in things like gay marriage and climate action and all those other social justice causes that they seem to spend all their time and effort harping on about. I think it's a lesson that too many of these giant corporations are committed to learning the very hard way.
I think you really are right there. The campaign, I think, for The Voice painting its aircraft, a couple of its aircraft, or putting a decal on that, The Voice, it just cost Alan Joyce a lot of public sympathy when he most needed it. To the Olympics, James, I see a lot of celebration and self-praise that Australia, a pretty small country in population terms, has more than halfway through the games, won a record 18 gold medals. Is behind only China, with more than 1 million people, and the US. Now, all credit, of course, to Gina Reinhardt, the billionaire who's